Hi again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism here at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the interim dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communication. I'm also the host of the podcast. Today, I'm talking with Joe Dix from the class of 1990. Is that right, Joe?
That is correct. Yes.
Wow. Joe, we're so glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So won't you tell everyone where you are, what's going on in your life, and then we'll kind of talk about your career path.
Okay. Well, currently I am working at WGN Television in Chicago. I am one of 3 directors for the WGN Morning News, which lasts 6 hours. And we kind of leapfrog each other because we are in an automated coding situation. And so in order to make that work, we each do an hour and all 3 of us leapfrog each other. So I end up doing the 5 a.m. hour and the 8 a.m. hour currently for the WGN Morning News. And I've been doing that for a long time.
We'll get into a little bit about that in just a few minutes, but let's talk about let's go all the way back and talk about growing up. And I always think it's interesting to find out a little bit about things that you may have felt shaped you, influenced you growing up into becoming the person you are, both professionally and personally. You grew up in Wilmette, which is over in the north side of Chicago. So Correct. Let's talk about that. Let's start there. Do you think that that environment, growing up in Wilmette impacted you?
Oh, absolutely. While it's a larger town than maybe some people are from, it felt like a super small little town because everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business and you saw your neighbors and people hung out. And so I always felt like I had to be on my best behavior, let's put it that way. So that always told me that I needed to, make sure that I had all of my ducks in a row and that I was doing the right thing. And so, yes, absolutely. It shaped who I am today. So, yeah.
Other things that may have impacted you. I always think it's interesting to find out from people about how their families reacted in terms of, did they expect you to be involved somehow in broadcasting, or do you think that they're surprised?
No, they are not surprised at all. My mother's father was actually a radio television host and announcer. Okay. So he used to work here in the Chicago market doing things like the Breakfast Club. So there are people who may or may not remember the Breakfast Club. The youngins are not going to know what the heck I'm talking about at all, but it was this morning television show for kids. And he was the Philco announcer because there were specific announcers for every single product on the Breakfast Club. So for that, he was the Philco announcer. And then he later went on to have his own show with a woman named Kay Westfall. And it was called The Bob and Kay Show. And it would be akin to a lot of the lifestyle shows that you're seeing today where people are just talking about recipes or the latest fads or whatever. And so that was kind of the thing that he did. But and I never got to meet him. I only saw like reels of him on film and stuff like that because he died when my mom was 14. So broadcasting is definitely in the blood. And my brother actually went to school for journalism at the University of Missouri and went on to be a reporter and an anchor eventually, although he's since left the business. But so it's kind of in the family.
That's interesting. So in high school, did you do anything like write for the paper? Did you, how did you start to explore that?
So I did the AV club stuff, but I didn't really start exploring it until I actually hit Western, believe it or not. And I started out as a computer science major at Western and then switched like halfway through to broadcasting. So, but kept my computer science major as a minor at that point because it was easier. So no, I didn't like really necessarily go. That's not why I went or anything like that. So
interesting. So yeah. What made you decide to switch over?
Well, the school did like an event. They're like, what's your career path kind of thing is one of the, and you go and you take a test and you answer all these questions and they say, here's what we think you should be. And they told me I should be a farmer. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to be a farmer. And I started looking at the other possibilities that they had on there. And one of them was broadcasting. And I was like, oh, well, my grandfather was in broadcasting. That could be fun. I'll see what that's all about. And I took a class that next semester in broadcasting and fell in love and started, and I was like, I called my mother, and my mother recounts this with great joy. Mom, I figured out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. She was, thank God, because, I had not found what I wanted to do, and I was already a sophomore in college. And so she was worried.
It's funny how parents will be like that.
Exactly.
So what do you remember? Because that was a big transition time for our department.
It was. So like the studio was brand new at the time, and the control room was brand new. And I think we might have been the first class to actually do the newscast out of that studio.
I'm sure you did.
So I remember that. I remember one of the classes I had us go out and do reporting for that newscast. I remember doing audio tape editing for radio and stuff like that. And then specifically like the producing and directing class that I took later on, where we were actually in charge of producing and directing the half-hour newscast that we were doing on the cable access channel. So.
And what I try to tell students that back at that period of time, if you wanted to go out and cover news with a camera, you had a huge camera that was connected to a very heavy tape deck.
Very heavy, yeah, that you carried on your shoulder, and a very heavy camera.
Yeah, and the tapes were themselves at book size.
Yeah, there was old 3/4 inch tape.
So at that period of time, which I think is really remarkable, you guys were really starting this legacy of producing that newscast, which is something that we continue to do, and over the years have gotten much better at. So who were some of the students you remember being involved with the newscast?
Tim, is his last name Atwater or something like that? He went on to MTV. Abshire, that was it. Tim Abshire. Jennifer Kloss.
Yeah.
And then Michael Moby. He goes by Michael Moby on Facebook, and that's how I remember him now, because it's so ingrained in my head. But I can't remember if that's actually his last name or not. But we were all, the three of us were kind of tight, and we hung out a lot and did a lot together, and we were all in the same producing and directing class together. So and then we were also in the oh my God, I'm blanking on the name. It was the fraternity, but then it was also like the
student organization that made
it was the student organization there. Yeah.
Because I think that you guys tried to do some unusual things to even provide alternative programs. I think maybe I remember game shows or
and then a woman, I want to say her name was Marilyn, who was in her grad school, and she had me produce and direct her show for her. That was her grad project, and so we were shooting in the studio for that as well.
Yeah. So I remember those times. I started as a grad student in 91, but I remember a lot of people trying to find their way and trying to find programming, different ways that we could provide programming at that period of time.
Right. Yeah. I think we even tried a talk show at one, not a full blown talk show, but like, a talking heads public affairs type show at one point.
Right. So, and of course, as you said, we've already talked about a little bit, Sharon Evans was,
yes.
And what do you remember about Sharon or any of the other professors at that period of time?
Well, Sharon and Sam were like the two amigos, and they were like on top of everything, but Sharon more so than everyone. And I think Sharon really is the one who like pulled that department together and made it what it is. And the school owes her a big debt of gratitude for that one, because she pushed for it in a big way, and she was the driving force behind everything that we did. she was a great teacher. I loved having her classes because she would always bring people in to talk to you about what was going on in the industry. I even came back several times after I graduated and talked to classes about where I was, what I was doing, and everyone was always surprised. You're making that little amount of money? Well, yeah. So, and we'll get to that at the end, is like, in terms of, you better really like this industry if you're going to do it. So when you got done, Joe, you had an opportunity in an internship. Was that intentional? You wanted to be going to the Chicago market to do your internship? Well, it wasn't. So I consider myself super lucky because I have kind of fallen into everything I've ever done in my entire life. It's really kind of weird, but it is what it is. So, at the time I was graduating, my younger brother, Patrick, who was an anchor at WHO for a while, and a reporter at Duluth and in Peoria for a while, he was dating a girl whose father happened to be the 9 p.m. anchor at WGN-TV. His name was Rick Rosenthal. Some people who are looking at these may or may not remember him, but he was the 9 o'clock news anchor at the time. So I contacted him and I said, hey, I understand you guys have interns. I'm interested. What can you do? Can you help me in any way, shape, or form? He's like, yeah, absolutely. Give me a resume, cover letter, and I will give it to HR and have them, give you a call. So he did that. I did the interview. And within 2 weeks, I had learned that I had gotten the interview. And I think this was late March, early April. And I had been worrying at this point because we were coming up to graduation day. And I was like, and I needed the internship to finish my degree. That was where the last 6 credits I needed to finish. So I got the internship. Literally the Monday after graduation, I went and started my internship at WGN-TV. And I was doing just grunt work stuff like labeling tapes and, logging things. And, I did actually get to go out to Wrigley Field at one point and sit in the booth and do pitch counts for the truck and stuff like that. So that was super interesting. And later I would end up going on to work that as a part-time person for a little while. And then it just so happens that at that time, WGN-TV had just done this great, big, huge call-a-thon for tickets to the Bozo Show. And anybody who grew up in the Chicago area in the anywhere from the 1950s to the 1990s, 2000 will remember Bozo.
Yeah. And
how popular Bozo was. And they offered tickets at the St. Patrick's Day Parade that year. And literally within 2 minutes, they had sold, 10 years worth of tickets.
Oh my gosh.
So I started helping to organize that, and it was all in a computer database, and then scheduling people to come to the show and print out tickets and stuff envelopes. And because you didn't email back then, you stuffed envelopes and you sent it in the mail. So I did that over my summer in addition to all the other things, and really took the time to go watch shows, be in the booth, watching the director and all that sort of stuff, and watching on the floor and seeing who was doing what and seeing how things were put together. And I would always ask and make a nuisance of myself and go, I want to see this. I want to, I'm interested, So I got to do that. And then the end of my internship, my boss is headed out to the airport and he asks me to drive his car back to the station because he wanted to leave his car back at the station rather than out at the airport. And so we're riding out to the airport and he goes, what are you doing after your internship's done? And I said, looking for a job. And he said, you're hired.
Oh my gosh.
So literally I got my job and it was part-time at that point, but he's like, do you want it? And I'm like, I'll take anything you got at this point, because that was the thing that my mom always told me. She's like, if they offer you anything, take it, keep your face in front of them and in the door.
Yep.
And it was ushering the Bozo Show. So I would help do the audience load in and all that sort of stuff. And then prize giveaways at the end and picking kids for the games and all of that sort of stuff. So that was so I did that until April of 91. And then the Bozo season ended. And so did my employment at WGN for about a month. because they didn't really have any other work for me at that point because I was part-time. I didn't, they didn't owe me anything other than that part-time work. So I went and took temp jobs for about a month and kept calling every week going, hey, I'm here. What, do you have anything? Do you have anything? And as chance would have it, this guy, his name was Devin Lewandowski, was a floor director at the time, decided that he wanted to go become a movie extra and left television broadcasting to be a movie extra. And I happened to call the day he quit, and the unit manager at the time was like, you want to come learn how to be a floor director? And I was like, absolutely, I'll take it. Well, and I didn't stop working since then.
Well, the thing I hope our listeners, especially our students, realize a couple of things there, Joe, is that as soon as you started your internship, you were trying to be a sponge. You're trying to absorb as much as you could in different areas and trying to understand that part of the importance that you would offer to somebody is the flexibility to know a lot in a lot of different areas.
Absolutely.
And then the persistence that sometimes you need to have.
Yep.
You see it as, well, I just happen to luck into it. In many ways, though, I see it as, again, somebody that had the talent and the ability, but kept at it and kept trying to make sure, as your mom had said, when you're visible, I mean, if they don't know you're there, you're not there.
Exactly. She was always like, if they want you to mop the floors, go mop the floors, but at least you're in the door. So.
and what I hope people also realize is, just to reflect back for a moment, because I don't know if you remember, but I do. I remember coming up to see you. I think it was 91. And we were trying to do a promo for the department. And I remember that, recording you, doing the Bozo show, and the cultural impact of that show was amazing. Yeah. That so many people, as you said, over a number of years, it just continued on.
Yeah.
That it's a little surprising that ended, but I guess at some point in time, the demo was, we need to go to a different, it doesn't matter how many people are watching.
Well, and at that point, you got to remember cell phones and the internet were starting to become the thing, and kids didn't watch TV the way they used to, at least not the same way.
So when you got it back in and they hired you, let's talk a little bit about your progression through morning news, because I think that's interesting. How you continue to. You started out as a floor director, but you continue to take on different responsibilities.
Right. So in addition to when I was flooring, we used to do these things called commercial conforming sessions. And so I would pester the directors to let me try the commercial conforming sessions, because it's tape, it's off air, it's not live. If you make a mistake, you can always do it again. And that's all the little taglines, like, find it at your local Walgreens, or, blah, 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 whatever the tagline is. It's just adding all of that stuff to the end of whatever commercial you were doing and adding the graphics in at the end. And it taught me a lot about timing and how to spit all the words out that you have to spit out in that short amount of time. So it was flooring all of those things and watching the decisions that the director was making and why they were making them that way, asking them questions about why they were making those decisions. And then I think it was, can't remember what year was the tragedy in Waco. Was that 1993?
It sounds right. Yeah. 93.
So around then, all of a sudden Waco happens, and I'm the floor director for the midday news, and it's happening during the midday show at that time. And the director is like, okay, kid, I need you to mark all of my scripts, and I need you to put the tape grid together, because at that point we were using beta tapes, and each story would have its own tape, and you'd have 4 or 5 machines lined up, and we'd have to make a grid of what tape was in what machine, for what story. And so, because he's like, I need to go be on the air. And he's like, I need you to do this for me while I'm on the air. Because once they're on the air with it, the talent didn't really need a floor director at that point. And we didn't have assistant directors at that point. So I marked all of his script, and because I had been watching them and how they were doing it, and then made the grid and took it around. And, that was kind of my trial by fire, was the beginning of, really understanding what it meant to direct live news.
Wow.
And then I would start doing like community affairs programs like Mass for Shut-ins, or they had a Jewish program called What's New, and the Hispanic talk show, and learning how to direct when someone's speaking a foreign language. And the producer, the talent of the show, we called it the red pen, because when he wanted you to change the graphic or something like that, he would flick his red pen, and even if we weren't seeing him, you as the director could still see him on camera flicking the red pen, going next graphic or whatever, next element. So it was, learning how to do all of that.
And even, I think you said you did some telethons, you did whatever came along.
I did. So I also got asked to PA and floor for telethon. So I did the NAACP's telethon. I did the MDA telethon in the early years. And it was, recording the network feeds, because inevitably we wouldn't take it live. We would tape delay it because of our baseball schedule. Because back then GN was doing lots of baseball games, and the telethon would always get interrupted by a baseball game. So we'd always end up shifting the show in time from when it was actually airing live for most of the rest of the country, and we would do it on our own schedule, and we would record the network segments. So I would log the in and the out on the network segment so that the director knew when they were supposed to get out and what they were hitting and what they were seeing. And then eventually I started assistant directing for that, and then eventually moved into directing that in the late 90s. I think I directed for like 10 or 15 years, the local stuff. And we ended up doing lots of stuff for the national show out of our studios so like we would finish our cut in, and we'd be playing back the national segment that we were in, because we were tape delayed by 2 or 3 hours. And we would quickly switch everybody into the other room that we had set up for whatever we were doing. And at that point, one of the big ones that I remember, Wicked, was very big, and it had just started on Broadway. And so they had a bunch of local, Chicago Broadway stars come in and sing the song For Good from Wicked. And we piped that to the national show at one point.
Huh.
So that was quite the learning experience.
So over that period of time, as you said, Joe, you're learning how to do a little bit more. And what I hope, again, our students and people watching understand is, you were continually adding to your skill set. You weren't static. You weren't one of those persons that said, well, this is all I want to do, and I don't want to, I don't want to have growth. I don't want to have any of this sort of development. And so, is directing about as complicated a job as it seems like it would probably be at that level?
It is, absolutely. More so on the show that I do now, because, well, yes, it's a scripted show. Our anchors have a tendency to just kind of do whatever they want, and you gotta follow it, and they aren't going to tell you that they're going to do it. And you kind of got to be ready to do whatever they want. So that's a whole challenge in and of itself, but we can get to that in a minute.
So one of the really cool things during this period of time is you won an Emmy.
I did, yeah. So in 2013, when the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup, was it 13 or I'm getting my dates mixed up in my head, but I want to say it was 13. They won the Stanley Cup, and they were coming home from Boston or something like that. And we decided that we were going to follow the Stanley Cup around town as the Blackhawks went wherever they were going to go with it. So it was dealing with, okay, we're doing our morning show, but we're also following the Cup, and we're doing all of these things. And, every reporter is, leapfrogging in other to know where they're going next and stuff like that. So it was putting all of that together. So it was a collaborative morning show general win for our show, but I happened to be the director who was directing at that particular time. So, and we submitted for an Emmy, and we won for Best Morning Show. So.
And Joe, you bring up a good point there that many people, I think, don't realize is the team effort that it takes to accomplish a production, whether it's a sports production, or in this case, it's news production, any live event. All of this, it takes a great team of individuals, and
absolutely.
And so, can you talk a little bit about making sure that your team? How do you communicate to individuals within your team about making sure that they're doing as good of a job as they can do?
Well, it's always about making sure that obviously communicate with everybody as much as over communicate, talk as much as need to, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. I know when I do parades or special events and stuff like that, I always have a camera meeting with the camera guys and go, okay, here's my plan. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to deal with things. Yes, we're going to get off plan at certain points, but that's fine. But I always want to try to get back to the plan. And that way everybody knows this is the plan. But the director has to stay really calm. Even if things are going to hell, if you let that stress get into your voice, your crew is going to get stressed.
Yeah.
So it's always, even in the most stressful times, finding those moments to compliment the crew, to say, hey, thanks, that looked great. Good job. I liked that shot, whatever it is, or thanks for that sound effect or whatever. And just always be encouraging of the crew. People will always give you their best if you treat them and with respect in terms of what they're doing. So always respecting their job and what it is that they bring to the table as a member of that crew.
Wow. So that's good advice. And as you mentioned, you try to do some pre-planning. Do you ever get a chance to do any sort of post-analysis as well?
So in the pre-pandemic times, our morning show would always meet every single day after the show. And we would talk about what worked and what didn't work on the show that day. And then we would always talk about what are we doing tomorrow. And we'd go through the list of guests. And, back in the pre-pandemic days, we used to do lots of crazy stuff. So like when Tom Hanks came to visit us, we had like a half a dozen or more writers and people who were around the building dressed up in costumes of the various movies of Tom Hanks as we were walking him down the hall to bring him into the studio to interview him.
Good idea.
So it's planning all of that. Who's going to be where? What camera are you going to cover it with? And where, that camera's going to go from where to where, and the cables will only go this far and you don't want to trip people. So it's pre-planning all of that coordination and figuring all of that out the day ahead of time. Or it's, we're going to do a band, or we're going to do this or that, or like when Zach Galifianakis and Will Ferrell came, we met them at the front door with Bozo the Clown, and we walked them down the hall. And we did the same kind of thing that we did with Tom Hanks, but this time we had a live cow in the hallway. It's on the morning news, we never know what's going to happen. And the morning news has changed a lot because of the pandemic, because we can't do those kinds of things right now, because we can't let a lot of people into the building and we can't do all that we used to do. But we still find our moments and do things, that, we can plan for at times. And, sometimes we don't end up planning for it. So,
we've already kind of reflected a little bit about all the changes that have happened in the last 20, 30 years in terms of technology, things that may have made your life easier, or in some ways maybe complicated it. What do you see as some challenges or benefits over that period of time?
Well, I think the benefit has been, like, I started in the before days when there was pre-roll. Yeah. And there isn't pre-roll anymore on almost anything because it's all digital and you don't need pre-roll anymore. So it used to be figuring out, like, all right, it's 6 words is about a 2 to 3 second pre-roll, and that's when you have to roll the tape so it's there when you go. And it gave the chance for the heads to get up to speed and the tape to get to where it needed to get to, because they would back it off by 2 or 3 seconds. So moving from that to having instant starts, and then everything is digital, and now everything is automated. So I've gone through a huge progression. Like, we used to have to run sheets of paper up to the Chiron operator so that they could type out whatever the lower third fonts were on the graphics, and they'd have to know what story it was associated with, and and then they'd put everything in order so that they knew what they were doing. And we've gone from that to the writer now puts it into the script and files it as a part of their script and types it themselves. And then we're using Ross automation these days. And so I have to go through and code the show for the TD and put everything in order and bring over the codes that are necessary to do whatever the producer wants accomplished. So,
well, that makes life easier.
It does, and it doesn't, because having an actual TD and an actual camera person standing there at the ready who understands what's going on in the show and doesn't have to be told immediately what has to happen, is like, those were the days, because we could do anything in a fraction of a second. Now it takes us a couple more seconds to get there, because you have to step over these automation hurdles. Not that they're impossible, and we've gotten better at it and we've gotten faster at it, but there's different challenges, shall we say, in terms of having to deal with automation, because everything is in a stack list order. And if you want to do something other that's in that stack list order, you have to break out of the stack list, and then you've got to get your technical director back to where they need to be in that list. So I have to say a lot more now than I used to in some ways.
And you have to probably do a lot more with fewer people.
Yes, absolutely. Like, we used to have 2 tape operators. We used to have 5 or 6 camera operators. And now we don't have any font. We used to have at least 1 or 2 font operators. So there's no font operators anymore. There's no tape operators anymore. And there's no camera operators to a certain extent. We, in the morning show, we employ two what we call Steadicam operators. And we do use a Steadicam, but we also use a jib. And those 2 positions are run by actual human beings. And then there's one other person that runs all 7 other cameras in the studio.
Wow.
And they're all automated, and they get controlled with buttons. And, that person is responsible to make sure that the camera's where it needs to be. So down from a crew. So we've got rid of like 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, like a dozen or so people in the last 10 or 15 years. So.
Well, it's about that time, Joe, where we talk about recommendations for students. And I think one of the things that you mentioned when in our correspondence is how important it is to have connections and to network. Can you start out a little bit with that?
Absolutely. So anytime your university or anybody that you know works in the field that you want to work in, or you have a friend of a friend who knows somebody who works in that business, it never hurts to see whether or not you can reach out and talk to that person and get information from them about their industry, even if it's just getting information about their industry. And sometimes they'll be able to hook you up with somebody who they know who might be able to help you. So I'll give you, for instance, a friend of mine from high school, his kids are all in like high school, college right now, and they're looking for places to go. And he's got this kid who's interested in broadcast communications, and he goes, "Oh, hey, I know somebody." And he hooked the 2 of us up, and we were able to have a conversation, and I was able to help him figure out what he wanted to do within the broadcast world. And that's all he really wanted, was to be able to figure that out.
Right.
And I said, if you need other connections, let me know. I might be able to help you, but I can't, obviously I can't guarantee until you really figure it out and own where you want to be. And as you heard me say earlier, in my case, I knew the 9 o'clock news anchor at the time, and I was able to get my resume in front of somebody, and that may or may not have helped me get the look-see or the interview. I mean, I still had to go and interview for the internship, but, at least it got me the interview. So use those kinds of things. My other thing that I always tell people who are interested in broadcast journalism is plan an internship for the end of your senior year. One of the last things that I did, and that I'm so glad that I did it, was do my internship last. Because as you heard, I ended up walking into the job that I got for the rest of my life. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't done that internship. Now, granted, you still have to like do your job in your internship and make sure that you're valuable and they understand that, you know, you have something to bring to the table, but you don't get to show that unless you have that opportunity at the end. And then the other thing, I was talking about how much in the early days you were getting paid. Like, I was like, if you don't really absolutely love this business, then I would say walk away, because you're not going to be making thousands of dollars. You know, you're going to be living poor for a long time until you've, you know, progressed. And you're going to be moving around a lot, and you're going to be in small little towns, because that's where you have to start. I got super lucky and was able to start in Chicago. I'm not the norm at all. So.
And I like that you said, don't ever burn a bridge.
No, absolutely not.
Because that, you know, even though it's a big country, lots of stations, it's funny how many people know each other and can talk. So if for some reason you have done a good job, that can help you. But if you've made somebody a little irate, then it's also going to work against you.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had directors from other stations here in Chicago who I don't know contact me and say, hey, I like what you're doing. I hear that you're a good guy. You know, so obviously people are talking, because we employ freelancers. We don't have like a lot of staff engineers. Those freelancers go to all of the other stations and they talk about their experiences at the other stations. I hear about other directors at other stations. So everybody talks to everybody. So.
Well, it's a good reminder, especially for young people as they're getting started, that yes, you need to work as hard as possible, but it's also about treating people with respect and being humble. I think when you go into the job, which, you know, everything that you've said, Joe, is a really great pattern, I think, for somebody that could follow, to say, you know, you were willing to prove yourself along the way. And that's a really good recipe for success.
Yeah. I mean, I can't expect right out of college to come in and go, I'm king of the hill. I'm not king of the hill at all. I'm like at the bottom of the totem pole right now, you know, and it took me 30 years to get back to the top of the totem pole. Well, not 30, but you know,
it took a few.
It did.
Well, it's been so great catching up with you, Joe.
Absolutely. You too.
And for all of those that are watching, make sure to continue watching. And if you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, or you want to recommend someone, just send me an email. We like to hear from our alums. We hope that you continue to watch and listen to the podcast, and appreciate everyone's support. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.